welcome to everyone who's joined us today on this webinar. And we're going to be looking at 3 strategies for everyone to feel better at work. And those of you who don't know me, I'm Matt Jenkin. I head up the employment team at Moorcrofts. And to talk about this topic, I'm delighted to be joined by Miles Mather. Miles, if you don't know him, he's on a mission to spread positivity in the workplace and create happy people. He's an executive coach and trainer and a transformational private coach. And I know he focuses on personal development for deep and long-term change. So welcome, Miles.
Thanks, Matt, and thanks to Moorcrofts for having me as well. As Matt said, I'm Miles Mather. I'm founder of Wellbeings and of Transform Coaching, and our purpose in both of these businesses is creating happy people. I'm excited. I can see the numbers, and I'm excited to have so many people on here today. We've got 35 people that have joined now, so that's fantastic. And we're going to look at 3 core dimensions of well-being today. And I want to help you, and I would like to help your teams explore some different ideas to feel less pressure, greater balance, and just really to increase positivity, perhaps to find more purpose, to feel better overall at work. So we've got the chat function if you want to ask any questions. We'll probably look at questions in between each of the 3 dimensions that we're going to look at today. And also, I'd love to invite you to make notes of anything that emerges for you today. Maybe even share anything that you might choose to work on with us all here, if you're okay to do that, so we can read those ideas and we can see if you're kind of responding and engaging to what we're saying. So we're going to have some fun and we're going to get the energy up. But before we do that, we're actually going to explore some deeper, brutal, honest stuff about how tough life gets. And the main reason that we're going to do that is so that we can respect the capacity of all of us human beings to be resilient, and how we cope with the tough stuff, and how we can thrive, and how we can move forwards to really positive well-being. So before I introduce myself any further, I'm going to share a story.
Miles, can I just finish off with just the housekeeping before we start, just so people know. As Miles said, we've got the Q&A function, which is there, which is great. Someone's just put a Q&A in saying you might want to check if chat is disabled. Mine is. Well, I can see your chat function, so I don't think it is disabled because I can see that chat. So hopefully that solves that problem. Sorry, if you use the Q&A rather than chat, I think that's probably better.
Right.
If you we're recording today's webinar, so after the event we'll send you a link to the recording. So for example, if you're not able to stay with us all the way through, you'll still be able to dip in at your leisure and find out what the end of the session looked like. And just from our perspective, from Moorcrofts' perspective, we're delighted to be joined by Miles today, because as well as presenting on sort of general employment law topics and issues, such as general employment law updates, shameless plug coming up because we've got one on the 7th of December. We think it's important as an employment team that we cover topics which are going to be relevant to organisations who are really interested in looking at the latest issues and trends in the workforce. And I think well-being is one of those. Most of my clients that I talk to, well-being within the workplace is top, if not probably the top 2 things on their agenda. And I was reading around the topic, and I thought this quote from CIPD was really good way of positioning the session. And they say fostering employee well-being is good for people and the organisation. Promoting well-being can help prevent stress and create positive working environments where individuals and organisations can thrive. Good health and well-being can be a core enabler of employee engagement and organisational performance. And I think that's a good way of kind of drawing the kind of why is it important to think about this as a topic. So having heard me ramble on a little bit, Miles, over to you to talk about this in far more interesting terms.
Obviously thought you'd hand it over to me there, Matt, but I thought.
Oh, no problems at all.
All good. So I mean, I think absolutely in terms of that quote, we all know how important this is, and we know how much happier people can be at work when well-being is focused on by the organisation and when they've got their own focus on it. So absolutely, that's what we're here to talk about today, the impact that it has on business performance, the impact that it has on happy employees, the impact that it has on churn and staff turnover as well. So thanks for that, Matt. So yeah, as I was just about to say, I was going to share this story. So I'm going to kick off with this. It was 7 in the morning and the nurse answered the phone in a friendly voice. Hello, special care baby unit, Anne speaking. The man stammers nervously. It's Ozzy's dad. I'm calling to see how he is. Hi, Dad, she says. Ozzy is sleeping happily at the moment. He has had a bit of a tough night, though. Oh, says the man, as his stomach feels empty and falls away beneath him. I'm afraid Ozzy had 5 seizures last night. The room spins for the man. What does it mean, he thinks? Confused, stressed, in pain. He smiles reassuringly across the room to his wife. Thank you very much. We'll be in shortly, he manages to say to the nurse. The man and the woman hold one another. Now, there'll be moments for all of us, there'll be events for all of us in our lives which shake the very balance of life itself. Thankfully, these big events are for the most part rare. But inside every person is a real person who is just as afraid, just as nervous, and just as in need of understanding. We all have our needs and desires. People are stressed and busy, and often they too feel like they're in over their own heads. So every single one of us experiences grief and trauma and significant challenges in their lives. In fact, we're basically built a bit more like that so that we respond to fear and worry as an instinctual survival mechanism. And sometimes it isn't even the big stuff which wears us down. It can be the repetitive daily stuff that we have to deal with. And coming out of the pandemic, we've all suffered from imbalance and additional pressure. So now more than ever, we need to learn to look after ourselves. Our 3rd child, Ozzy, was diagnosed with a rare genetic condition called PAX2. And we struggled as a family and felt very physically and emotionally drained for quite some time. This was a period with poor well-being for my wife, Emma, and I. But we pivoted our mindset about a year into this experience, having decided we'd been struggling for long enough. And we actually chose to focus on positivity and create a different narrative for ourselves. We chose to focus on his beautiful smile and his unique personality and the strength that he had shown. And a fair amount of time has passed now, and 4 years on, our reality is stable, and we're delighted to say that Ozzy, who's nearly 5 now, he's thriving at his new school where he has additional support. But for all of us, when we experience unexpected challenges, we feel vulnerable. If we are alone with our thoughts and disconnected, we can feel bad. And if we lack in energy and drive, we can feel bad. And if we doubt what positive circumstances are possible for us, we can feel bad. So when we aren't coping well, when we react negatively to a situation and get angry and feel things are unfair, we can lose perspective for a while. When shit happens and our well-being suffers, we don't think we can cope, but the vast majority of us do ultimately cope, and we get stronger from whatever our journey throws at us. And we realize we can actually deal with all sorts of stuff. We can dig ourselves out of holes, and we can better connect with our reality. We focus on our relationships with others, and we manage our attitude around what we can and can't control. And it helps to take time to improve our relationship with ourselves, with our own feelings and our own desires. For one, I've got a different relationship with my own well-being now, as well as the study of well-being, and I know my wife does too. And I walk around with a smile on my face most of the time, and I'm really fortunate in so many ways. I really love what I do. I'll introduce myself a little bit more because I know I haven't done that yet. So I live with my 3 young kids and my wife Emma and our black Labrador, as I was saying at the start, in Farnham in Surrey. And I'm actually somebody who spent a significant proportion of my career in a role that I didn't love. I wanted to do something different. I wanted to do something a bit more contributory. So I made a change and I became an executive coach and trainer. And my focus is to create new energy, vision, and potential for people. And I've got two businesses in this space. One's called Transform Coaching, which offers corporate coaching and training on interpersonal skills and emotional intelligence. We look at subjects like communication skills. We look at subjects like leadership and teamwork. And I've got another business called Wellbeings, and Wellbeings offers customized wellbeing programs across the full range of 8 dimensions of wellbeing. And we work with all sorts of different interventions on all this plethora of subjects using apps, videos, small groups, big groups, talks, and so on. So when Matt invited me to speak on this subject for you guys, there were so many different things that we could have explored together. And, you know, wellbeing is a really broad topic, and so many of the elements of it are important. It's quite personal. So when I put the content together, I wanted to ensure I concentrated on just the most pertinent areas. One of the big bugbears I've got about programs for well-being that are offered is they're quite vanilla, is a good word to use probably, because they offer kind of all things to all people. And I think that customizing the need according to the individual is really, really important. However, today we're going to try and talk about 3 things. 3 fundamental areas that are truly core for well-being at work, and those are social connection, physical rest, and setting personal goals. And I'd be really delighted if I can help you just a little in your work lives to connect with yourselves and to connect with others better, to look after yourselves, and to figure out somewhere exciting you can go in the future. Because when we look after our relationships, when we look after ourselves, and when we look after our plans for the future, we tend to feel pretty fantastic. So let's talk about that first subject then. Let's talk about social connection. How do we define this area of well-being? So it might be described as the sharing and developing of meaningful relationships, sustaining those relationships with others. Recent scientific work shows that there's a huge impact on health for social relationships. There's actually an increased risk of illness and death amongst people with low quality or low quantity of social relationships. And we're physically, biologically, cognitively social creatures. We're inherently wired to belong. We're not really going to dwell on remote working today. Of course, in practice, it makes a difference to be in person, and it's better if we can do that. But when we're with other people, particularly spending time on a one-to-one basis, whether it is on the phone or a video, being fully present is what really matters, because we're at work for such a large proportion of the time, and being a big part of connecting with people during that time is proper, deep listening. That's how to connect better with people. An American psychiatrist, Mark Goulston, he talks about helping people feel felt. And this is a truly amazing way to build relationships and to influence people. Because in practice, if you ignore other people's feelings, you're not going to get anywhere. But if you can convey, I understand what you're feeling, and people feel that you get them, which comes from considered listening and paying attention and curious questioning so that they feel fully heard out. If we ask ourselves questions like, what would I feel if I was them? Would I feel worried or angry or scared or frustrated? And if we take that further, if we look at the relationship between our thoughts and our feelings, and we help them move backwards in that process from their feelings to figure out what their thoughts were, perhaps to help them process so they can discover their own awareness. And this is why it's so important to engage in silence in a conversation, because if you're giving people space to hear themselves, they might add more. They might hear themselves speak and be able to expand on their thoughts. So if you can help someone discover their awareness and figure out what they could be thinking about that work challenge or problem or change that they're managing, what is making them feel that way, then people tend to be grateful for the connection, and it tends to deepen the relationship for everybody. So if we think of feelings and needs, and if we truly hear people out, people will genuinely walk into a burning building for you. And as I said, that the insight here really is to be quiet and not even to listen to your own thoughts or to what you want to say next, but to be silent. And we often hear that, you know, silent is an anagram of listen, which is a good way to remember this. So otherwise expressed, always work on the relationship before you work on getting your point across. Dr. Chatterjee, who wrote a book called The Stress Solution, he's quite big on Instagram. He shared something amazing on this subject, and this might be good for anybody out there who's in a couple relationship, and I'll just share it because I thought it was very, very powerful. But he calls this the 3D greeting, and that stands for kind of across the different senses: eyes, touch, voice. And this process that he offers people is to spend 15 seconds to be completely present with someone. So maybe you do that first thing in the morning when everyone's rushing around, getting ready to leave the house or whatever. You actually say, do you know what? I can give 15 seconds to my partner. And when you think about those three aspects of eyes, touch, and voice, the voice could be saying something nice to that person and looking into their eyes and maybe touching them on the arm. When we think about body language and we think about connection, you know, in an appropriate way, a sort of gentle touch can mean so much in a relationship of all types. And even in a business situation, saying a proper good morning to people as you walk into the office can have a fundamental impact. I've definitely worked in offices where people didn't even say good morning to one another. And for me, that's a fundamental measure of there being issues in the culture. So I've raised this first focus for improving our well-being of focusing on our social existence, better listening and sharing, and deeper relationships. And that's really a means of better connecting, which in turn is going to increase our own self-esteem, our empathy, our sense of reassurance and support from others, which will reduce lower anxious feelings. So if anyone wants to ask any questions about this in the chat box, I think it's working. So we'll take a look at those in a minute. I'll give you a second to do that. Happy to answer any questions. I guess my question for the audience here today is, you know, does this deliberate behavior, this focus on better connecting make sense to you? Is this something you already do sometimes? Do you see any challenges around this at work? And kind of while you're thinking about that, I want to just add perhaps that, you know, the benefits of great relationships at work, they stretch far beyond our own well-being, and they can strongly influence our impact in the business. And Matt talked about the importance of well-being for business performance at the start. And, you know, if we have those great relationships and we are better at influencing building connections, it in turn is going to create a reinforcing effect. When we successfully deploy those strong interpersonal skills, such as powerful listening, to positively influence others, we will be more successful in what we do, and we will take greater satisfaction, and we will gain self-esteem and reassurance through our psychological sense of competency, in turn, further augmenting our well-being. So that's kind of the first topic in terms of what I wanted. And we've got a couple of questions coming.
Yeah, we've had a question which kind of person asked this question must have read my mind, because it was what it's something I was going to ask Miles, which is a challenge I think lots of organizations are facing, is how do you develop deeper relationships remotely? So in the world of Zoom, Teams, whatever remote meeting mechanism that you're using, how would you suggest organizations can help individuals develop relationships remotely?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And do you know what? I do 90% of my coaching online, Matt, and I can tell you that it's not superficial. Quite often it's very, you know, we get to know one another very well, and we have you know, little epiphanies and in moments of insight, and people are listening to their own thoughts and so on. So I would say it's very, very possible. I think it's not about necessarily the context as much as the behaviors. I think that we have the ability to listen to somebody. Obviously, it's going to be easier on a one-to-one call. But, you know, I had a client recently. She was an SVP of a big recruitment business, and she brought a bit of feedback her boss had shared with her to me. And she said, you know, you went straight in to that meeting you were like straight out the starting blocks. You know, there wasn't any chit chat. And she said, yeah, I'm rubbish at chit chat. And we talked about this, you know, coach to client for a while. And I shared with her a model, which I'll share now, just in case it's of use. But there's a rapport building model, which is a really well-known one, been around for ages, but it's dead simple, which is kind of part of its charm. But it's called FORM, and it stands for family, occupation, recreation, motivation. I think it's really important, however little time you've got, however time pressurized you feel, and however important it is to get to talking turkey, that you take that time to build the rapport. Ask them about their family, ask them what their challenges are at the moment, ask them if they did any sport or went out at the weekend. You know, and I think as you go through that model, FORM, as you get on to kind of motivation, it segues quite nicely into BAU and talking about work. So that's a thought for you, Anna, on that one.
Yeah, certainly. I think I'm seeing more and more thought being given to how people are behaviours on remote meetings, and also behaviours around mix, where you've got remote meetings, but people are also present as well in the office. So you might have half the group are actually face to face, and how you make sure everyone's involved. So I do think it's something that organisations are paying more attention to.
Yeah.
And an interesting observation as well around this saying hello and good morning, about the impact that it can make. And I think, you know, I would second that people need to think about that. I'm sure, I know, Miles, I'm sure you've got some other things to say on that as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree. And I think it's really just about taking the time and being aware of building that rapport. You know, if we are too focused on getting our point across or getting our action completed, and we're not focused on the relationship, in a lot of ways, we're kind of getting in our own way, because we're not facilitating support from others, and we're not offering support to others. And the sense of disconnection that they might feel as a result of not focusing on the relationship first is probably going to cost us more in the long term in terms of time. Thanks, Helen, by the way, also for the question. Saying hello and good morning as we go in the office, I think, yeah, it's a really nice thing to do. And I, you know, people respond to the way we move, people respond to the way we speak, the energy with which we speak. I think it was in Stephen Covey's book, he came up with the idea, you know, the 7 effective habits, of coming up with a phrase like top banana for when people ask, you know, how are you, like your own unique phrase. Because when you're speaking that language, you're creating, I talked a moment before about narrative, you're creating your narrative, you're creating your energy, you're deciding the dialogue, and you're kind of positioning it in a positive way. So even if you're having a crap day, if you tell people you're feeling, you know, great or fantastic or whatever, it can actually have an impact on the way that you come across and the energy that you have in yourself. And we had a question from Heather as well, which is, well, a statement around, you know, I've learned a little about empathetic leadership, and it makes sense. So I'm glad that kind of we're all on the same page here. I think, you know, empathy, it's a really challenging tool for us to learn to use, a way to behave. It's easier for some of us than others. I think it genuinely can be a learned skill, and I think it's one of the most important. It's one of the 5 kind of elements of positive intelligence, or sorry, emotional intelligence, and it's definitely worth focusing on. You know, am I being empathetic when I speak to the team that's working for me? So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to move on to the second area of focus, and this area of focus is about work and about rest, and it's about balance. And you know, the real point here to make, and I know we talked about this, you know, when I did a podcast with you a while ago, Matt, is modern life is an onslaught to the brain, and as human beings, you know, we're under so much pressure. We're overloaded, we're always on, we're constantly flitting and jumping from one thing to the next. So, you know, this second area of focus for wellbeing, it's about our personal awareness of this behavior. Because if we're more conscious about it, we can do more about it. It's about being present with ourselves, because we've all just got so much going on, you know, with our obligations to work, partners, friends, perhaps children, perhaps elderly parents or other family. You know, there's a seemingly infinite set of demands on our time. And if we're not careful, we can really get overloaded. And that's what I'd like you to avoid. So not by waiting till you hit the wall and then making some changes, but by preventing overload and overwhelm ahead of time, because we might have developed some bad habits to respond to all these stimuli in this modern world, all these demands. Do we say yes too often to things that we shouldn't be saying yes to? Are we constantly looking at our phones and screens? Are we just on it non-stop, you know? And also another one, which I'm going to talk about, is task switching. Do you switch from tasks throughout the day, one task to the next? So if you're perhaps failing to take time out for yourselves, what I'd like to offer you is some awareness and motivation to help you deliberately change some of these habits. And this is really in the hope that you can feel more mentally healthy, more in control, more effective, and more energetic. So if we look at where we are now in our current shared reality, then I'm going to offer you some ideas of 3 things you can do. When I did my coaching accreditation, I was introduced to a coaching model, and I know I've talked to you about this before, Matt, called our paid reality. And it stands for pressurized, always on, interrupted, and distracted. So the more aware we are of our paid reality, our pressurized, always on, interrupted, distracted reality, the more conscious we are of our poor habits, the more likely we will be to be able to change those habits and to look after ourselves. I'm always using the word deliberate, so if I say it too many times, tell me off. But if we make deliberate choices and we can regain autonomy over our time and how we feel, the aim here is to reduce the pressure, you know, to take time out, to stop the interruption and distraction, and to be present and focused on one thing at a time. And I guarantee, you know, you'll feel better from giving this concept your attention. There was some research by Statistica around how we get on average 600 emails a week, which is like 2,500 a month almost. And also in the UK, we look at social media for over 2 hours on average. So, you know, the first habit that I'd like to offer here, the personal intervention you can make for yourselves, is to erect your own barriers to incoming information. And I'd invite you to consider doing that at least twice a day for 1 hour each time. And also I'd add, if you've got influence in a business on the culture surrounding expectations to respond fast to emails, particularly outside of working hours, and if you behave like this, your team will behave like this, is that behavior appropriate? Is it necessary? And should it be discussed and changed? It's neither reasonable nor healthy for anyone to expect you to reply in the moment to the arrival of a new message. There's the odd exception to this rule, but for the most part, it isn't necessary. Whether it's email, WhatsApp, Messenger, or Teams, or Slack, or whatever else. So I'd like to offer you to feel self-empowered, to turn those notifications off, to give yourself permission to shut down the email program and to focus on your priorities. And if you need to tell key people, perhaps in an urgence, to give you a phone on the, you know, just to give you a phone call, let them know this is the habit you're implementing and why. Because then they can get through to you, but you can still focus on one task at a time. And I want to talk about this task switching as a really key point, because if you're flitting rapidly between tasks, it works your brain incredibly hard. And I'm sure that none of you watching this webinar are doing something else right now, that none of you are checking your emails on your phone. In fact, the superheroes amongst you have probably turned off your email program completely. In our prefrontal cortex, when we work on a single task and focus our attention on one thing, both sides of our brain work together. So in France, at the National Institute for Health and Medical Research, they found that when we add in a second task, the two sides of the brain are forced to try and work independently. And that means we're 3 times as likely to forget details, and it causes many worrying changes in performance. And there was another bit of research in London, the University of London, that showed that when we try and do two things at once, our IQ drops to 15 points to the level of an 8-year-old. And in psychology, we call this process set shifting. And set shifting has a switching cost. Flitting rapidly between tasks, for example, some spreadsheet work, which has one set of rules in our mind and memory, and replying to an arriving email is highly inefficient, because what's actually happening is it takes longer overall as the brain disengages from one task and re-engages with the next. The Journal of Experimental Psychology said that the brain shifts goals and turns on different cognitive rules that we've learned for the different tasks. And that here, right there, that's where the lost time is. So as we're jumping around, perhaps believing we're a multitasking master and how adaptable and smart and on top of our work we are, no, you're not good at multitasking. No one is, and it's been repeatedly proven in research and tests. So I hope that that convinces you that multitasking is not a good idea. So we had a comment here from Helen. I found putting a disclaimer on my email helped me work and let people know that they respond in their own time frame. Yeah. While it suits me to email you now, I do not expect a response. Yeah, lovely. I love that, Helen. I hope everyone can see that there. Thank you for that.
Yeah, Miles, I'm certainly starting to see more emails with that wording on there. So yeah. I think it does show that perhaps people are becoming more conscious, and also from, I suppose, as an employment lawyer, I'm bound to try and get some employment law into a webinar at some stage. I think there is a drive, certainly we've seen in Ireland and in France, for the right to disengage, actually giving employees that statutory right not to be expected to respond.
Brilliant.
Whether that's, I don't think we'll ever see that statutory right in the UK, but I actually think that it is something that organisations need to think about, and that's culture set from the top, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so I think things that you can do around allowing people the space to, not say switch off, but to concentrate on a particular task without distraction.
At very least, the concentrating on one thing, Matt, I completely agree. And if not, some time to switch it off as well would be quite important as well.
Yeah.
Just so fundamental, because when it comes to this balance and rest subject, if we're not currently in the habit of looking after ourselves properly, it has such a negative effect in the long term. You know, if we take something as simple as getting outside of the office, getting away from your laptop, perhaps getting outside in the fresh air, you know, it's fundamental.
Yeah, I certainly in my working lifetime, I've seen that change in approach to answering communications quickly. You know, I always blame BlackBerry the first time I used to see for those who show my age now with a BlackBerry, but you know, that red light that used to go off whenever you had an incoming email, and all of a sudden you just that drove your response. As soon as as soon as you saw a red light, you had to check your emails, and I think it goes from there. And so it's going to be a really if my wife is listening to this, she'll be spitting her coffee out, because I'm not a good proponent of this, and it's something I need to work better at. But I think it's good to have, Miles, you tell us that we need to think about this and actually make that conscious decision to try and give us that space.
Yeah.
I'm a work in progress on this, certainly.
Well, awareness is the first step, Matt. So yeah, there we go. I mean, I'd love to just share for a moment just some stuff about being outdoors and getting fresh air, because, you know, whilst there's loads of benefits to taking exercise anyway, right? You know, for health, for mindset and everything else, you know, being outside offers so much as well. You know, it increases our brain function. It helps us get more oxygen. We can concentrate better when we've been outside. It gives us vitamin D, which helps for nerve growth and neurotransmitters. And also being outside, it actually releases endorphins and serotonin, which is going to rebalance our mood and stress. So the question then is, can you build a daily outdoor walk into your life? And if not daily, you know, almost daily would be awesome. So I mean, I think what we're talking about here is creating superior barriers, you know, superior habits where we have barriers, and doing one thing at a time, giving that our attention, and also recognizing the limitations of our brain so that we can kind of get more done. You know, it's not realistic to think that we can multitask successfully. If anyone wants to ask a question on this second topic, is there anything hard to implement?
Yeah, I think Caroline made a really good comment about kind of this always on being a universal expectation. She's talking about running a training course yesterday where it's clear people are multitasking in the background and doubts they remember much of the course. And I would agree with that. If it, you know, in the days of a physical event, I doubt, you know, I know perhaps it used to happen, but it was a lot more difficult. People would feel, I think, a little bit more awkward about sitting there in front of you as a presenter whilst they're on their phone or doing other things. I think kind of webinars and that sort of culture allows people to do it, but I think it's being in the moment on that. And as I say, you know, it's things that you can recognise in work and at home. You know, all too often I'll find myself sat in the evening watching TV, but I'll be looking at the phone and I'm either doing one thing or the other. And I think that to me, I need, you know, say to be present in watching the TV program, but to actually concentrate on one thing at a time might help.
It's no bad thing to leave your phone in another room. I'd be interested to know, Caroline, whether or not this training course was online or in person. I for one, in my previous life, you know, when I worked in procurement, I remember a supplier was pitching, and a chief marketing officer was on his BlackBerry during the pitch, and I remember the owner of the business came to me after. He was so angry that they weren't, you know, they'd been up late preparing and all this, and wasn't even giving it his attention. And I think it is rude, you know. I think it is rude, Caroline. So, you know, if we can focus on one thing at a time, I'm always tempted to have a vote here, and anybody who's been doing something else whilst they're on the webinar today, just put in a Y just to say I admit it, so we can see what proportion of people are actually prepared to be honest about whether they're doing it. Do you feel guilty about it is another question, I guess, because perhaps you know that perhaps focusing on one thing would actually be better for you in the long time, you know.
We've got a couple of people coming forward, kind of, you know, putting their hands up that they've been doing other stuff whilst they've been listening to us as well. But you know, I think that's, you know, it's a useful recognition, isn't it, that we've just got to accept that people do it. Hopefully, what, you know, as I say, I am an appalling proponent of this, so definitely a work in progress. But for me, one of the big takeaways that I'll take from this session, Mark, is that I actually need to think harder about it. I actually need to take action to build those barriers. Yeah.
I think, you know, we'll talk about how to take action towards the end, because I had something to offer on that, actually.
Okay, excellent.
I just want to recap on the second subject, because, you know, this idea of being always on, not taking downtime, or not simply focusing on one thing, you know, we've explored our stressful modern world of being under pressure, interrupted, distracted. We've learned that we can better and perhaps more deliberately control our time by pausing emails and social media and turning notifications off, not allowing them to distract us. We can choose to do one thing faster, more accurately, in a focused way. And also we can give ourselves some critical me time, perhaps during an outside walk, perhaps improving our stress and our brain function and our overall health and mindset. You know, I'd just love to offer that. Email closed. Thanks, Joe. Appreciate the support. So the third area that we're going to talk about today relates to occupational well-being, and also to setting directional goals. And if we look up definitions for occupational well-being, you get a few different answers. I always think this is a bit less obvious, you know, mental well-being, physical well-being, everyone kind of gets it. Out of the 8 overall dimensions, occupational is a bit more opaque. And I think a good definition is that it's around our ability to achieve that balance between work and leisure in such a way that it promotes our health and our personal satisfaction. So occupational well-being involves our ability to achieve that healthy balance, but also managing our stress and merging our commitment into our occupation into a lifestyle that's satisfying and rewarding. So stated simply, we need to understand what parts of what we do for a living we enjoy. And if we enjoy what we do for a living and it's the right thing for us personally, it's going to improve our well-being. And so for me, the essence of occupational well-being, it lies mostly in the proportion of time spent being satisfied at work. And what I mean by that, to break it down a bit, is it's the balance between being involved in activities which resonate with us rather than being involved in activities which conflict with us from a value perspective, from a purpose perspective. And we've all seen and read commentaries by people like Simon Sinek on the criticality of purpose in our careers. Start with Why, his book, while repetitive, is an important book. So why do we do what we do? What does it mean to us? Why does it matter? And how does it connect to who we actually are? It makes sense to do some reflection around this, even to understand what parts of what we do matter to us. For my part, I've been running a 2-month career coaching course called Breakthrough for 4 years now to help people connect to their work purpose. So this is an important subject for me. The central model we use is called Why, What, How, Now. And the premise of this whole personal exploration is that we accept that having an awareness of why we do what we do, of why our job is of value, and we do a bit of soul searching so that the development of that can be turned into a goal. So that's to say the purpose piece can turn into our direction piece. The why bit can turn into the what bit, into what we want to achieve and what our personal aspirations around where we're headed are. So my assertion on this section of the session is that if we have clarity of direction founded in our personal stuff and our purpose for doing it, then we'll have better well-being. Our efforts will have more meaning. We will be happier at work. So I'd like to offer an allegory and an idea here. It's not a new one, but it's not usually applied in this context. So it's another Miles story. So a bearded man is in the marketplace, and he bumps into a friend of his, a bald guy, and the bald guy basically says to him, I want to tell you something I've just heard about a friend of ours. And the bearded man says, well, before you tell me, I want you to pass a test. Are you sure what you're about to share is true? And the bald guy shakes his head. No, actually, I just heard it. And then the bearded man stops him speaking and cuts him off and says, well, if you don't know for certain it's true, is what you want to say something good or kind? And again, the bald guy, he shakes his head and he says, actually, no, it's really not kind. It's just the opposite, you see. And the bearded man says, well, hang on. So if you're not certain what you want to tell me is true and it isn't good or kind, then I might not let you tell me. I'll give you one more chance, though. Is this information you want to share, is it useful to me? And the bald guy is a bit defeated. He goes, no, not really. Well, concludes the bearded guy, if what you want to tell me is neither true, good, nor useful, then why would you tell it to me at all? So the friend turns on his tail and trots off across the marketplace. Now, this is ancient Greece. The bearded man went on to be one of the world's most famous philosophers of all time, the classical Greek philosopher Socrates. And he is credited with laying all the fundamentals of modern Western philosophy. You know, he's had a profound influence for 2,400 years on Western philosophy, along with Plato and Aristotle, his students. So why am I sharing this story? Granted, if something isn't true, good, or useful, it might not be worth sharing. But what does that have to do with our well-being and our happiness at work? Well, I believe this is exactly where well-being connects with direction and purpose. Because if you're going to feel positive, if you're going to be committed, and if you're going to be useful and valuable, it's got everything to do with it. And the key word here is authenticity. So when we talk about why, and we talk about being true to something, in order to feel fulfilled, our role needs to be true to what matters to us, to our interests, and it needs to be good in the sense that we can relate to what the company offers, the product or service to the world, what's good or kind for you about it. And then also that we personally are useful. We're well suited to this direction because of our unique combination of skills and personality, which make us effective in the role. So if you're doing what you love and you're learning and growing, then you'll be useful and the passion will shine through, and you're much more likely to thrive. And in our careers, if we reflect for ourselves, it's very reassuring to be able to understand why you are true to the world, true to the role rather, and what about this company that you work for and this service is important to you, and also why you're personally useful and why you're going to contribute to the business. And there's an answer for each of these three within exactly what you do right now. And if we spend time reflecting, we can find that. If we understand for ourselves, and if we can convince those around us that we are these three things in relation to our role, other people are going to engage with us much more emotionally, and they'll see a much more credible purpose. And that's going to feel pretty great for you, really. So if you can figure out why your career path has purpose for you and is authentic and is a true place in the world for you, you're going to be exercising your kind of own will. We talk about like more philosophy here, like Kierkegaard and people like that. So own will is also what the Greek philosophers always explained. You've got to follow your own will to reach eudaimonia, or fulfillment, sometimes translated as happiness. So as we're starting to get more understanding of our purpose, perhaps we can turn our attention to the second part of this process and translate our personal relationship with our work into a directional goal. If we'd like to do a good job of that, and we want to set a well-formed personal career goal, we might address 3 questions as a test to see if it's going to be successful. In terms of impact, how does this goal that you're writing give you what you want? In terms of commitment, are you able to commit strongly to the goal? And in terms of energy, does it make you feel huge excitement? So I'll share my example. You know, I will build a well-being business which helps create 100,000 happy people across many organizations by providing them with greater awareness of their well-being and how to improve it, greater self-regulation of their behaviors and habits, and a greater sense of personal identity, which connects to the contribution that they make. So if you've got any questions about how to find out for yourself about the way in which you're true, good, and useful to your role, please do share them, and we can have a chat about that. I know it's something that takes a little bit of reflection. Consider maybe writing down what it is that you currently connect with at your work.
Yeah, I think this idea, Miles, of happiness at work is really interesting. I was doing some I say reading around ready for our session, and came across some statistics. And I couldn't statistics, and they were on a website, Happiness at Work, or I think a consultancy, and I'm not quite sure where they got their numbers from, but they said only 2% of people say they work just to pay the bills. Being happy at work is important for 90% of us, yet over half of us are unhappy at work. Now, I don't know whether those numbers seem kind of right from my perspective, or from my experience, but they may be right, but they're equally staggering, aren't they? That many people, you may have that many people in your organization who are unhappy.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of statistics on, out there around well-being and around happiness at work. One of the ones that I find most striking is that whilst we're all making these efforts to understand more about well-being at work and joining webinars like this and talking about it, and there's loads, and I mean, obviously I probably see a lot of them because I'm more connected with other coaches and trainers in this space, but there's so much on LinkedIn, for example, on well-being. And yet, in despite all of that, over 20% of employees don't engage with wellbeing programs. So if I've got a mission, it's to change that. apart from anything else, you know, because if they're not engaging, then they're not understanding what's on offer, or they're not getting the right type of support, which is a real worry given the rates of depression, the rates of anxiety, and the challenges people in this post-pandemic economic decline that we're all facing, right?
It's a good point that you make, Miles, around engagement in kind of well-being programs, because I think lots of people who are attending this session will be, you know, involved perhaps in putting well-being programs in place, but actually they have to think about how employees engage in that, because otherwise there's going to be some, I think, low take-up rates. And I think some of the I think some of the online and app-based well-being apps, that's one of the, talking to people who've implemented those, I think one of the things is that kind of enthusiasm for those can wane a little bit quite easily, which, and we've actually got a question around that, because someone's asked, if you feel after a period of time that your enthusiasm for work has waned, how do you go about rebuilding engagement and enthusiasm? So you start off, you know.
Well, I'll give you two three-part models for that, Matt.
Okay, excellent.
Right? The first one actually is a consequence of the rain and the fact that you said you were thinking about building an ARC. So I've got a motivation at work model called ARC. It's actually ARC because I cheated. But the A stands for autonomy. The R stands for relatedness, and the C stands for competency. And it's our own responsibility as we engage with other people in our business, including our managers, to make sure that we're getting enough of these three ingredients for intrinsic motivation, because they are way better than carrots and sticks. That's extrinsic. We don't want that. We want intrinsic. We want to feel autonomy. We want to feel like we relate to the culture and other people, and we want to feel good at our jobs. We want to feel competency. So is there anything that the anonymous attendee can do for themselves around figuring out which of those three ingredients is missing, and finding a way to move forward where they can perhaps get more of those ones which they're indexing lower on around autonomy, relatedness, and competency at the moment? Because as part of all of this psychology stuff in the context of human motivation, it's a pretty universal rule, and I'll be very surprised if you don't get a bit of an aha when you think about that and say, oh golly, actually I haven't got autonomy, or somebody that I work for fed back and said something wasn't very good and I can't get that out of my head, so I'm not feeling competent. You know, there'll be something there for you, I would have thought. I just also want to offer a second model in this context before I come to David's question and a couple of the other questions around clarifying goal setting, you know, which is, well, I can do both at the same time actually, because you know, the question around the Socrates tests, first of all, true, good, and useful. That's what we're looking for. So if you're looking for an increase in your enthusiasm for your current role, and you can think about the things that are true about it for you, that matter to you. There will be some. It might not be the perfect role for you forever, but let's just imagine that we can connect better to it, and we can understand that there are quite a few elements within it, varied as it is, that you do really enjoy. And then you can think about what parts of what it offers as a product or service to your customers or to individuals, whether it's B2B or B2C, what does it offer to them? What, you know, why is it good for them is that second bit. And then the last bit is around useful. Now, useful is about you. Useful is about what your personality and unique skills that you can bring to the role are. And I often think, usually as individuals, we've probably got two diverse things that we're really good at. You know, it might be for some people, you know, numeracy and interpersonal skills, or it might be something more diverse, you know. I think the best example of this was like Elon Musk, and everyone says, oh, he's got this interest in, you know, space exploration, and he's also, you know, interested in, you know, physics, and he's also in, you know, and like when you get this combination of unique skills for an individual, and we've all got it, I call it the blink, and I think we can find it, and we can kind of work around that. So that's a thought on that one. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, that's it, but yeah, that made sense to me, certainly.
I just want to come back to the goal testing, because we had David asking that question around what they were, and just testing a goal. There's all sorts of models you can do around testing a goal. I'll offer you kind of 3. You can look at the SMART model, which isn't bad. It's a basic model, but it kind of works. Specific, measurable, and so on. And I'm sure everyone's familiar with that. There's another one which is kind of an NLP model called PEXOR. I created another one called Drives, and they got 5 or 6 parts. But this simplification I offered today of this one, I was just saying, first of all, just dig into, is this goal going to have an impact for me to give us what we want? Is it something we can commit strongly to? And does it make us feel excited and energized? Because if it isn't those 3 things, you almost may not bother doing the research on the other elements of a well-formed goal, because you're not going to get very far if you need to commit consistently to strong effort to realize that goal, if it isn't going to do those things for you.
Excellent.
Okay.
Well,
so I guess I was just going to sum up, Matt. Does that make sense?
I was going to say, have you got kind of some
sure.
kind of summary? It's been a fascinating session, but yeah, if you've got some kind of closing comments to kind of summarize it.
It's just really, I want people to take things away, and I hope it's been useful. Having some new ideas is great, but having a clear record of something that you might personally take away is better, so it doesn't evaporate into the ether. So if you can choose to grab your pen and paper and you can literally write something down, that's going to increase your chances of acting on anything that occurred and emerged for you today. And if you take that action step one pace further and actually tell somebody about it, it's got a much greater chance of actually happening. So I'd love nothing more than to think that each of you maybe your teams are going to have 1 or 2 things to take away. So with that in mind, just in case people are dropping off now, I'll just offer a few action steps, 5 action steps. So number 1, listen to others deeply and patiently as if your life depends on it. Number 2, get away from your phone and avoid the pressurized, always on, interrupted, distracted, and build in and schedule proper downtime and defend it furiously. Number 3, don't multitask. Give your attention and focus to one thing at a time. Number 4, spend time reflecting on what is ahead for you in your role and why it is true to you, good for you, and why you're uniquely useful in offering something special in that role. And the 5th one, reflect further and build a well-formed goal based on that reflection, which will give you what you really want, one that you can commit strongly to, which you're excited about. So
excellent.
I was just going to offer, we'll be in touch, I know, by email with everyone, Matt, but also I was just going to offer, look, I'm very happy to have a chat with anyone. I love meeting new people. I love to, have conversations and meet new people around these topics and talk about it. So if you want to book into my diary, you're very welcome to do that. I don't know who can see this link. Can you see that? I'm just offering to have a chat with anyone, really. I'll answer David's. So there we go. If you want to have a look in my diary, I've got quite a lot of sessions in over the next few weeks, but you'll probably find a time that suits you there, that will be mutually workable. So really nice to have so many people on here today. I can see we've still got 34 to the end, which is pretty good going. So thank you so much.
That's excellent. No, and first of all, yeah, thanks for everyone for joining us today. I hope you found it useful. As I say, we're looking to kind of expand on our webinar sessions to cover these sort of topics because I think they're really interesting for individuals and organisations. So thank you for joining us, and a big thank you to Miles for taking us through what is a fascinating topic. And I do hope people take up the opportunity to get in touch with them and explore it in a bit more depth. So as I say, the recording will be coming out to you. And if we can do anything in terms of follow-up or any questions, yeah, let me or Miles know. We'll be happy to help. So thank you, and have a great rest of the day, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Cheers.